It's been a dramatic 10 months from the Prime Minister's formal apology to the stolen generations in February to last week's rather extraordinary division between Liberal and National senators over Labor's infrastructure fund. In between, the opposition brought in a cardboard cutout of the Prime Minister to highlight his non-appearance for a Friday sitting of Parliament. The sittings ended soon after that. Work Choices is no longer. The Fair Work Bill has been introduced and the PM gave the first ever national security statement. And in the middle of all this was first-time Member of Parliament Bill Shorten, formerly Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union, a key advocate of workplace safety who took on national prominence during the 2006 Beaconsfield mine tragedy. We decided to invite Mr Shorten, the Parliamentary Secretary for Disabilities and Children's Services, so we could ask him what it's like inside Parliament. And he joins us now from Melbourne. Bill Shorten, welcome to Sunday Agenda.
Good morning, Helen.
Well, what has it been like to move from Union Leader to Parliamentary Secretary? What's your first year in Parliament been like?
It's a privilege to be in Parliament. I found that it's a lot easier to be an expert about what you think goes on in Parliament when you're not there, but when you get there you realise there's a lot to learn. The apology which you identified in your lead-in report was awesome. It was bigger than the individuals. It was a sense that it was the right thing to do and long overdue, so that was a privilege to be involved with that. And most recently, our Deputy Prime Minister, Julia Gillard's introduced the Fair Work Bill, which will reform and improve workplace bargaining and equity and conditions, and I think that's a great thing. That's why a lot of us got elected to Parliament, to restore the fair go at work.
All right, before we talk about that, I want to ask you a couple of other issues. Do you think, for instance, there should be a code of conduct for members of Parliament? There's been a rash of recent incidents, from an MP taking a photo of a man trying to set himself on fire, to chair sniffing, to simulated sex at a party. We know MPs are only human, but the public does expect them to act better than this, don't they?
Well, in terms of the reports of the particular incidents, I'm sure all those involved regret their involvement. But in terms of a code of conduct, at the union, when I employed hundreds of people, I generally found it's a bit hard to try and regulate every element of common sense. So I'll wait and see where the debate goes. I'm a first-term Member of Parliament, so I'm not about to start giving advice to everyone else in terms of a code of conduct in Parliament. My gut reaction, if you're asking, is I don't know how necessary it is, but wiser heads than mine will probably look at the question and give us some direction on that.
Well, at the same time, there's also some suggestion that perhaps politicians aren't getting paid enough. And associated with that, there's a news story today that Kevin Rudd is working his staff too hard and that he's lost about 40% of his new appointments since last December. Is he too tough a boss?
No, not at all. I read those news reports with interest this morning. A couple of facts. First of all, the Labor opposition, when coming into government, inevitably the nucleus of very trained staff which had got their experience in opposition would spread from the Leader's office into other ministers' offices. Also, it's inevitable there's churn in a modern workplace where people get promoted. So the idea that we've misplaced 40% of our staff and we can't find them is not correct. I think it should be noted that the new Leader of the opposition...
Mr Shorten, are they being worked too hard, and are a number leaving altogether because they either don't like the pace or can't keep up the pace? I mean, you know, this is the top office in the land. This should be a job they would walk over cut glass to stay in.
Yeah, but you used some numbers. You were quoting an article which said 40% of people have been lost. They haven't. People have moved jobs. The short answer to your question is no. I don't think people are being worked too hard. And anyway, have a look at Malcolm Turnbull's office down the corridor. When he took over, I guess as is right, he sacked everyone, 100%. All lost their jobs. I think inevitably in politics there's some churn, and I don't pretend that merely because Malcolm Turnbull sacked every person that was on Brendan Nelson's staff, that therefore there's some great crisis there. No, I think you'll find that everyone feels very proud to work for the Prime Minister, and many people who've worked for him, it goes well for their experience working for other ministers. I think it is a storm in a teacup, that proposition. OK, well, let's look at the area of disabilities, since that's your portfolio. You said at the National Disability Awards in Canberra last Wednesday that, quote, people with disability deserve improved, better targeted services that are simple to access and respond to their changing needs. What have you done in your first year to improve services for people with disabilities? It was a bit of an eye-opener when the Prime Minister gave me the opportunity and the honour of working in the area of disabilities. As a Parliamentary Secretary, I report to my Senior Minister, Jenny Macklin. I think together we've done, and the whole government's done quite a lot. We've put $1.5 billion extra into disability services. From this Monday, 715,000 disability support pensioners will be each receiving $1,400, which is a good shot in the arm before Christmas. We've just ratified the United Nations Convention on Rights of People with Disabilities in June, and in fact, as late as last week, we've uncapped the number of places to help unemployed disabled people get a job, and we've also introduced draft standards for access to premises. The reality is that people with impairment don't get a square deal in this country. The reality is that a lot of them are treated as second-class citizens, but I also think that in the first 12 months of the Rudd government, disability is moving up the political food chain. People with impairment are getting greater attention, and there's a lot more which we will do in the new year with the development of a national disability strategy. It's a very rewarding area, but it has been neglected, and I do think that the whole community needs to stand up more for people with disability and their carers.
You mentioned your government has ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. What does that actually mean in a practical sense for people living with disabilities in their daily lives?
Well, the UN Convention has approximately 34 sections, and they go towards the whole lived experience of a person with disability. What it means is that government organisations and non-government actors in Australia have to make sure that their standards of treatment of people with disability meet these the UN protocols, the UN Convention standards. It provides greater legal weight for people with disability if they feel they're not getting a square deal. Also, the chapters of the UN Convention are what we're using to help form our national disability strategy. It is important that when we sign documents internationally that we reflect them locally, and vice versa, that our local conduct is consistent with the sort of country we want to be in the world.
The awards we mentioned, the people who won the National Disability Awards really are inspirations, aren't they? From Bill Bradley, who founded the Belrose Rugby Club, to Sarah Cullen, a young stroke survivor who has completed a Bachelor of Speech and Hearing Sciences, to Anne MacDonald, born with cerebral palsy, who learned to communicate by pointing to letters on an alphabet board. I guess it's no wonder you like this job and perhaps have had your eyes opened.
Well, impairment's a fact of life. You can be born with an impairment, you can acquire it in a blink of the eye in a car crash, or you just get it through ageing. What I found is that what disables people with impairment is the attitudes of the community. And a practical translation is if I can't get on your bus or catch a plane or get a job or go to university or own a house because of my impairment, people tend to say, well, oh, they've got an impairment, what do you expect? Whereas if I couldn't do those things because of my gender or my skin colour, people would be up in arms. So I just think that disability needs a bit of that political oomph, that political commitment, as do their carers. I mean, carers suffer greater chronic illness. They also have to make employment choices and don't get the same superannuation. I mean, there is a lot to be done. That's why we've got the Harmer Review into pension reform coming up, which Wayne Swan and Jenny Macklin in particular have been pushing along. So there's a lot to be done, but there's a lot which can be done outside of Parliament. That's probably the big lesson for me this year, Helen. Parliament is great because you get to legislate, you get to debate on the direction of the nation. Obviously, I think our Prime Minister and team are going well. But what you realise also is there's a real world outside of Parliament, and it's very important that we always anchor what we do in Parliament with the lives that people are living outside.
Let's change to another area. You were opposed to the Coalition's work choices, and you said before that's why you wanted to get into Parliament, and you now support Labor's Fair Work Bill, obviously.
Sure.
There are some commentators who say that Labor's bill now shifts the pendulum back in the union's favour. As a former union leader, is that the case? For instance, the unions can now have a seat at the negotiating table, even if they only represent one worker at a site. Now, how is that fair?
When we talk about fair work, what we've got to recognise is that the best way for an Australian company to move ahead is if it harnesses the capacity of its employees. I did over 1,000 agreements in my old job, and I visited many thousands of workplaces. Running a business in Australia is hard work, but the best resource that any business has is getting the best out of people. What I believe the Fair Work Bill does is it ensures that if people choose to be represented by a union, in bargaining, they can at least have that voice. I think that a lot of the discussion which says that somehow there'll be legions of unions marching through the door of every milk bar in Australia and demanding conditions is not correct. But it is correct to say that the previous laws did go too far. I mean, what is wrong with the idea of people being able to choose a representative to help them negotiate? I mean, when you buy and sell a house, you can use lawyers to do your conveyancing, yet when you negotiate the wages of your condition, some in the community believe that it's unfair for people to get advice.
Bill Shorten, you were standing behind the Prime Minister yesterday when he urged the banks to maintain employment levels after ANZ announced 800 job cuts by Christmas. Now, it might be fine for government to pressure banks and other employers, but will they listen? And if they don't, what can you as the government do?
I was there behind the Prime Minister as he was making an announcement with our Minister for Transport, Anthony Albanese, to widen the ring road in the western suburbs of Melbourne and the northern suburbs. The totality of what he said, though, was first of all he made the point that Australia's banks are amongst the world's best, that the global economic crisis is really difficult, but that it's important that employers, and these are my words, not his, but it's important that employers treat their staff appropriately. Now, I'm more than confident that most employers always have and always will treat their staff properly, but this new Fair Work Bill will remove some of the capricious and unfair nature of the ability of some organisations just to sack people at will. So I just think that there's only 10 minimum employment standards, the ability to bargain, the ability or the right not to be unfairly dismissed. These things are not alien to the Australian nature. It's just about ensuring that, I mean, we're a small country, 21 million people. The only thing we've got going for us are our people. It's just making sure that every person, every actor at a workplace at least gets a fair go. And that's what I think these laws do. I think they're very sensible.
OK, just very briefly, we've saved the best question to last. The Sunday Telegraph in Sydney has reported that the PM has ordered lamb off the menu at official Parliament House functions, and the former AFL star and meat and livestock spokesman Sam Kekovich has called him un-Australian, if that's true. Now, do you eat lamb? Is it true that it's been ordered off the parliamentary menu? And do you still want it on the parliamentary menu?
I eat lamb. I used to work in a butcher shop. There goes my vegetarian vote. But I know the Prime Minister likes lamb. Sam Kekovich can afford to worry about other things. And if lamb is served at Parliament House, yes, I'll eat it.
All right, Bill Shorten, thanks so much for joining us.